The classroom buzzed with the usual noise of chatter, rustling papers, and chairs scraping the tile floor as the seventh graders waited for their teacher to arrive. Jacob Turner sat at his desk near the window, twirling a pencil between his fingers, trying to ignore the whispers coming from the group of boys at the back of the room. They were loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough to pretend they weren't talking to him. It had been like this for weeks, ever since he mentioned during a history lesson that his grandpa had been a Navy SEAL. At first it had slipped out accidentally, but once it did, he couldn't take it back. The boys, especially Tyler and Mason, found it hilarious. They insisted no old man could have ever been a real Navy SEAL, and they had made it their mission to tease Jacob every chance they got. Jacob glanced at the door again. The clock above it ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last. He wished the teacher would walk in soon so the class would settle down, but Mrs. Baxter was running late today. Every time she was late, the room felt more like a battlefield. "Hey, Jacob," Tyler called out from behind him with a mocking tone. "Did your SEAL grandpa teach you how to fight pirates yet? Or is he too old to remember anything?" Mason laughed loudly, slapping his desk, and a couple of other kids snickered. Jacob's ears burned. He didn't want to turn around because he knew if they saw his expression, they'd tease him even more. He just kept staring at his notebook, trying to shut them out. "Maybe he was a SEAL at the zoo," Mason added. "You know, like the animal?" More laughter followed. Jacob clenched his jaw, feeling the familiar frustration building in his chest. He wished he had never said anything. He wished his grandpa hadn't insisted on keeping everything private all those years. He wished people would believe him just once. The teasing didn't hurt because they doubted the story. It hurt because his grandpa had actually served, he had sacrificed, suffered, and lost friends, and hearing people mock him felt like someone taking a knife to memories that deserved respect. Before Jacob could think of anything to say, the door opened and everyone quickly shuffled to their seats. But it wasn't Mrs. Baxter who walked in. Instead, standing in the doorway was a man in camouflage uniform, tall, serious, with a calm but commanding expression on his face. Behind him were two more men dressed the same way, and behind them, Jacob's heart skipped, was his grandpa. The room fell completely silent, almost eerily so. The tall soldier stepped forward, scanning the class. "Good morning," he said with a firm voice. "We're looking for a student named Jacob Turner." Everyone turned toward Jacob as if a spotlight had landed on him. Tyler's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion, and even Mason looked stunned. Jacob stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly, unsure whether to smile or panic. His grandpa stepped forward too, his eyes warm but proud. "There he is," the man said with a nod. "Jacob, your grandfather told us you were learning about military history today. We thought we'd drop by." The classroom felt like it had stopped breathing. Jacob swallowed hard. Yes, sir," he said, barely above a whisper. Tyler raised a hand slowly, as if unsure whether he even had the right to speak. Are you guys real Navy SEALs?" he stammered. One of the men chuckled softly. "We don't dress like this for Halloween," he replied, and the class erupted into nervous laughter. But Jacob could see Tyler's face had turned pale. The tall SEAL stepped toward Jacob's desk and saluted sharply. Jacob didn't know what to do, freezing in surprise until his grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder. "At ease, son," his grandpa said gently. "This is for respect, not formality." Jacob felt a warmth spread through him. Something he hadn't felt in weeks. Validation. Pride. A confirmation that he hadn't been lying. That he hadn't imagined any of it. His grandpa looked around the room, the wrinkles on his face deepening with seriousness. "I heard some kids in here think my grandson lies about me," he said in a calm but stern tone. Jacob felt every eye shift again, this time filled with unease. "Well," his grandpa continued, "I don't like lying. And I don't like bullies. So I brought some friends today to show you what respect looks like. The SEALs behind him all stood straight, hands folded behind their backs, their presence heavy and disciplined. Even Mrs. Baxter walked in at that moment, stopping instantly when she saw what was happening. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. The tall SEAL turned to her respectfully. "Ma'am, we're just having a little chat with the class about integrity." She nodded quickly, stepping aside to let them continue. Jacob's grandpa addressed the room again. "I served for almost 20 years. I've been deployed to places you'll never read about in textbooks. I've seen things I hope none of you ever have to see. I lost friends who were brave, who were loyal, who believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." His voice softened, but carried weight. "When Jacob tells you he's proud of me, that's not a lie. And you shouldn't mock someone for being proud of their family." The room stayed silent. No one dared to move. Tyler looked down at his desk, his earlier bravado evaporating completely. The grandpa nodded toward Jacob. "Stand up, son." Jacob did, still stunned. "This boy," his grandpa continued, "is stronger than he knows. He told the truth even when people laughed at him. That takes courage. And courage is something every good SEAL respects." The SEALs behind him nodded, each one acknowledging Jacob with genuine approval. Jacob felt his chest swell, his throat tightening with emotion. Tyler finally looked up, guilt all over his face. I didn't know," he murmured weakly. The tall SEAL turned his head slightly. "And that's the whole problem, isn't it?" he said. "Mocking someone without knowing a single thing about them." Mason tried to speak too, but words failed him. The grandpa stepped closer to Jacob and ruffled his hair gently. "I didn't want to come here to embarrass anyone," he said. "But sometimes kids need to learn that actions have weight. Words have consequences." One of the SEALs stepped forward and looked at Jacob. "You got guts, kid," he said. "And guts matter more than popularity." Jacob felt himself smile for the first time in days. The grandpa then turned back to Mrs. Baxter. "Ma'am, with your permission, we'd like to spend a few minutes talking to the class about real service. About what it means, what it costs, and why respect matters." Mrs. Baxter nodded eagerly. "Please, absolutely." The SEALs stepped to the front. And as they spoke about sacrifice, teamwork, missions they could safely discuss, the entire class listened with more focus than they had ever shown in any lesson. Even the kids who usually whispered or doodled sat frozen, absorbing every word. Jacob sat down again, but this time he wasn't trying to disappear. He felt taller, stronger, anchored. No one looked at him with ridicule anymore, only amazement. And for the first time, the classroom didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like victory. The classroom remained so quiet that Jacob could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner as the SEAL team continued their talk. Every student watched them with wide eyes, even those who normally seemed uninterested in anything related to school. The men had a presence that filled the room with both respect and authority. The tall SEAL, whose name they introduced as Chief Warren, spoke with a calm confidence that made every word seem important. He explained how teamwork mattered more than individual strength, how discipline was built one day at a time, and how the most powerful thing a person could carry was integrity. As he spoke, Jacob noticed Tyler glancing at him every few seconds, his expression a mix of embarrassment and something close to remorse. Mason kept his head down, tapping his foot nervously against the leg of his desk. They looked so different from the kids who had mocked him earlier. Meanwhile, Jacob's grandpa stood proudly near the front, arms crossed loosely, listening to his former teammates share experiences from decades of service. Occasionally he would nod, sometimes smile softly at the memories, and other times his expression hardened as someone referenced a difficult mission or fallen comrade. The stories the SEALs shared weren't the sensational kind kids expected. There were no dramatic Hollywood explosions or exaggerated heroics. Instead, They told stories of long nights, freezing waters, mental pressure, moments where quick thinking saved lives, and moments where even the strongest men were pushed to their limits. These stories carried a weight that made the room feel almost sacred. At one point, a girl in the front row raised her hand timidly. "Did you ever get scared?" she asked. Chief Warren looked at her thoughtfully before answering. "Every mission," he said. "Fear isn't something you get rid of. It's something you learn to control. Courage isn't not being scared. Courage is doing what needs to be done even when you are scared." His words hung in the air, touching something deep within the students. Even Mrs. Baxter was listening as if she were hearing something she never knew she needed. After a few minutes of more stories and questions, Chief Warren walked toward Jacob's desk. The room tensed slightly, as if anticipating something important. Chief Warren placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder, firm but reassuring. "Your grandfather has told us about you," he said with a small smile. "He's proud of you. Very proud." Jacob felt his throat tighten. It wasn't often that his grandpa said something like that out loud. Hearing it from one of his grandpa's teammates made it feel even more real. Thank you, sir," Jacob managed, trying to stay composed. "You know," Chief Warren continued, "legends aren't made from the stories people tell. They're made from character, integrity, doing the right thing even when people doubt you." His eyes flicked briefly toward Tyler and Mason, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "And standing firm when everyone else tries to pull you down, that's not easy for a kid your age. But you did it." Jacob didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, hoping that expressed enough. His grandpa stepped closer then, clearing his throat. "Chief's right," he said. "I've always told Jacob he's got more backbone than he realizes. Maybe now the rest of you see it too." Several students exchanged glances, some looking ashamed, others thoughtful. Jacob sank slightly in his seat, overwhelmed but grateful. After a moment, one of the other SEALs, Petty Officer Diaz, pointed toward the chalkboard. "Mind if we show you something?" he asked Mrs. Baxter. She shook her head quickly. "No, please, go ahead." Diaz picked up a piece of chalk and drew 2 circles on the board. In one circle, he wrote comfort. In the other, growth. He turned back to the class. "This," he said, tapping the circle labeled comfort, "is where most people live. It's safe. It's easy. No one laughs at you here. No one challenges you." Then he tapped the growth circle. "This is where you become someone better. It's where you learn, where you make mistakes, where people doubt you, where you doubt yourself. But it's also where you find out who you really are." He looked at Jacob then. He stepped into this circle the moment he told the truth, even though he was scared people wouldn't believe him. That's growth. The room fell silent again, and for the first time, Jacob noticed several students nodding subtly, as if they finally understood something they had never thought about before. Tyler slowly raised his hand. "Can I ask something?" he said quietly. Chief Warren nodded. "Go ahead." Tyler swallowed hard. "Why did you come here? I mean, why today? Why to our class?" The tall SEAL glanced at Jacob's grandpa, who took a small step forward. "Because Jacob doesn't deserve to be treated like he's lying when he's telling the truth," his grandpa said. "And because I found out he wasn't just teased, he was mocked. And that's not something I take lightly." Tyler looked down at his hands. "We didn't think it was true," he admitted softly. It sounded too big." "Sometimes the biggest truths sound unbelievable," Jacob's grandpa said. "But that doesn't make them lies." The words hit Tyler hard. He nodded slowly, regret filling his expression. Before he could say anything else, the bell rang, startling everyone. But none of the students moved. No one was willing to break the moment. Mrs. Baxter gave a gentle smile. "Let's take a few minutes before we transition," she said quietly. Instead of rushing out of the room, Students began lining up to shake the seals' hands. They asked a few more questions, thanked them, and shared their amazement. Even Tyler approached Jacob's grandpa slowly, his movements hesitant. "Sir, I'm sorry," Tyler said, barely audible. "For, doubting you," and making fun of Jacob. Jacob's grandpa looked at him steadily. "It takes guts to apologize," he said. "Make sure you remember this moment next time you're tempted to tear someone down." Tyler nodded hard and stepped aside. Jacob watched, still absorbing the surreal events unfolding around him. When the last student had spoken with the seals, Mrs. Baxter walked over to Jacob's grandpa. "This was extraordinary," she said. "Thank you for doing this, truly." "Just doing what's right," his grandpa replied. "These kids need reminders about respect, about truth, about the power their words carry." The seals finally stepped back and began preparing to leave. Chief Warren gave Jacob a small salute, and Jacob instinctively returned it as best as he could. When they stepped out into the hallway, a wave of whispers swept through the school. Students poked their heads out of classrooms. Teachers stared in surprise, and Jacob felt himself glowing with a pride he had never experienced before. As they walked down the hall together, Jacob looked up at his grandpa. "Why didn't you tell me they were coming?" he asked. His grandpa chuckled. "Because surprises hit harder," he said. "And because I wanted them to see the truth with their own eyes." Jacob smiled. The three seals paused at the entrance of the school, waiting for his grandpa to say goodbye. Chief Warren placed a hand on Jacob's head. "Keep being strong, kid. The world needs more people like you." Then he turned to Jacob's grandpa. "You raised him well." With that, the team stepped outside and headed toward a black SUV waiting by the curb. Students gathered by the windows, watching in awe. Jacob stood beside his grandpa at the doorway, feeling like he was part of something much larger than he had ever imagined. As the SUV drove off, Jacob turned to his grandpa. "Thank you," he said softly. His grandpa smiled down at him. "For what?" "For believing in me," Jacob said. "And for today." His grandpa put an arm around his shoulders and guided him back inside. "Come on," he said. "The day's not over yet." But Jacob knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Today had changed everything. Asterisk. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Jacob. Everywhere he walked, heads turned, whispers followed, and students who had never spoken to him before looked at him with admiration instead of mockery. It felt strange, almost unreal, like stepping into a different version of his own life. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. For so long, he had kept his head down trying to avoid it. Now people approached him with questions, curiosity, even respect. During lunch, a few kids invited him to sit at their table, something that had never happened before. They wanted to hear more about his grandpa, but Jacob didn't brag or exaggerate. He simply told them what little he knew, because much of his grandfather's service was still classified. And instead of rolling their eyes or laughing, they listened as if every word mattered. Tyler and Mason stayed quiet throughout lunch, sitting at their usual table but not daring to say anything. They looked uncomfortable, lost in their thoughts, as if replaying their earlier behavior in their minds. Jacob didn't stare at them or throw anything back at them. It wasn't in his nature to seek revenge. He was just grateful things were finally different. After school, Jacob walked home with a sense of weightless excitement. When he stepped through the front door, his mother rushed over to him instantly, having already heard from the school office about what had happened. "Dad brought seals to your school?" she asked, almost laughing at how unbelievable it sounded. "You have no idea," Jacob replied. "It was the craziest thing ever." His grandpa sat on the couch, reading the newspaper as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But when Jacob walked over, His grandpa lowered the paper with a proud glint in his eyes. "You handled yourself well today," he said simply. Jacob felt warmth spread through his chest again. "I didn't even do anything." His grandpa shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. You were honest, even when it was easier to stay quiet. You stood by the truth. Most grown men can't do that." Later that evening, Jacob sat at the kitchen table doing homework when there was a soft knock on the front door. His mom opened it and called back, "Jacob, someone's here for you." He walked over and saw Tyler standing outside, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes downcast. Jacob blinked, surprised. Tyler looked nothing like the cocky kid who used to tease him. Hey, Tyler muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Jacob nodded and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "What's up?" Tyler let out a shaky breath. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't know your grandpa was really a SEAL, and I didn't know you were telling the truth, and I shouldn't have said all that stuff. It was stupid." Jacob studied him for a moment. He could see the sincerity, the embarrassment, the guilt weighing on Tyler's shoulders. This wasn't the fake apology kids sometimes gave just to avoid trouble. This was real. "It's okay," Jacob said quietly. "You didn't know." Tyler nodded, still staring at the ground. "But I shouldn't have treated you like that. Even if it wasn't true. It wasn't right." Jacob gave a small smile. "People make mistakes." Tyler finally looked up, relief flickering in his eyes. "Thanks," he said, "and your grandpa's amazing." Jacob laughed softly. "Yeah, he is." When Tyler walked away, Jacob felt lighter. Not because he needed the apology, but because it showed just how much today had changed things. When he went back inside, his grandpa raised an eyebrow knowingly. "Everything good?" he asked. Jacob nodded. "Yeah," Tyler apologized. His grandpa grunted, folding his newspaper again. "Good. Maybe the boy learned something today." Days passed, and the story of the SEAL's visit spread through the school like wildfire. Teachers mentioned it, students whispered about it in hallways, and even the principal stopped Jacob to tell him how impactful the moment had been. Jacob didn't let the attention get to his head. He stayed quiet, humble, grateful. But inside, he felt stronger than ever. The teasing stopped completely. In fact, Tyler and Mason slowly drifted toward becoming actual friends. They still had their moments of immaturity, but they treated Jacob with respect. And Jacob, being forgiving by nature, didn't hold grudges. A week after the visit, the social studies teacher announced a new assignment. Students were to write a paper about someone they admired or looked up to. When Jacob heard the prompt, he smiled immediately. That evening, he sat at his desk, staring at a blank page before writing the first words without hesitation. "My hero, my grandpa." As he wrote, he realized how little he truly knew about his grandfather's missions, but he didn't need the details. What mattered wasn't the classified files or secret operations. What mattered was who his grandpa was as a person: strong, quiet, loyal, brave. Man who had faced things most people could never imagine, and who still carried himself with humility. When Jacob finished the assignment, he brought it to his grandpa, who adjusted his glasses and read through it slowly. Halfway through, his grandpa cleared his throat and wiped the corner of his eye, pretending it was just dust. At the end, he set the paper down and looked at Jacob with a soft, deeply emotional expression. "You did good, kid," he said. "Real good." That weekend, the two of them sat outside on the porch as the sun dipped low in the sky. The air was warm, filled with the quiet sounds of neighborhood life. Jacob leaned back in his chair and glanced at his grandpa. "Can I ask you something?" His voice soft but curious. "Sure. Why don't you ever talk about your missions? I mean, not the secret stuff. Just anything." His grandpa inhaled slowly, staring out at the fading light. "Because real service isn't about talking," he finally said. "It's about doing. And sometimes the things you do, they stay with you. Some memories are too heavy to revisit. Others belong to the people who didn't make it back." Jacob listened carefully. "But I like hearing anything you're willing to tell," he said. His grandpa smiled gently. "Maybe one day I'll share a few more stories. The ones that won't make your mother worry too much." Jacob laughed quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before his grandpa said, "I'm proud of you, Jacob, not because of anything I did, but because of who you chose to be." Jacob felt emotion swell in his chest. "I'm proud of you too," he whispered. Weeks turned into months, and Jacob carried the lessons of that day with him everywhere. He stood a little taller, spoke with more confidence, and learned to value the truth even more deeply. And whenever someone new asked about his grandpa, Jacob didn't hesitate anymore. He didn't fear disbelief. He knew who his grandfather was. He knew the truth. And that was enough. One afternoon near the end of the school year, Mrs. Baxter called Jacob to her desk. "I want to show you something," she said with a warm smile. She handed him a stack of letters, handwritten, colorful, touched with sincerity. They were notes from students, thanking the Seals for their visit, thanking Jacob for standing strong, thanking his grandpa for his service. Jacob flipped through them, stunned. "We're going to send these to your grandfather," Mrs. Baxter explained. "I thought he might like to see how much he inspired everyone." Jacob felt a lump in his throat as he read through the letters. Some were emotional, others simple, but each one reflected the impact of that unforgettable day. When he handed the stack to his grandpa that evening, the old man held them carefully, as if they were medals. "These kids," his grandpa murmured, voice thick with emotion, "they're the future. Maybe we did something right after all." Jacob leaned against him, smiling. "You did." And as they sat together, surrounded by the quiet comfort of home, Jacob realized something profound. Heroes didn't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wore old flannel shirts, drank black coffee, and carried stories they never bragged about. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person could do was simply tell the truth, even when no one believed them. But Jacob had learned another lesson too, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Respect wasn't given. It was earned. And that day in the classroom, when a boy defended the truth and a group of Seals walked in to stand beside him, respect filled the room like a rising tide, washing away every doubt, every insult, every cruel word. It was a day he would never forget. A day that changed everything. A day that showed him who he really was. Asterisk.